Hello, there's Professor O'Brien here. I'm just going to very quickly go through the material of McGraw-Hill, Chapter 36, Problems with Pronouns. A lot of this is common sense stuff, and apart from the fact that some of it might be material that you need to know that you don't, it's mostly simple. The pronouns are the last. I want to jump onto page 602 here. Pronouns are really the last category of word in English that retain separate case forms. You know, whether you've thought about this or not, that me ate the cake is wrong. You should say I ate the cake. In the same way, you would know that the cat saw we is wrong. You should correct it to the cat saw us. So subconsciously, you already know about case. There are doer forms, which are called subjective. Go about halfway down page 602. You'll see the subjective pronouns I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they, etc. And then there are the objective forms. The pronouns, it's the same pronouns, but now they're receiving the action. So you could, in a sentence like John saw me or saw the subjective forms will take the first spot. I saw, you saw, and the objective forms, the second column there, halfway down page 602, take the second form. They receive the action. John saw me, John saw him, John saw us, John saw them. You get the idea. And then each of them also has a possessive form. One being adjectival and the other being predicative. That is to say, my car, but the car is mine. So pronouns have different forms depending on whether they're being used to refer to the doer of the action or the receiver of the action, or whether they possess something. The base forms of the pronoun aren't really a problem, but let's take a look at the sentence next to the caret at the bottom of page 603. The author and me share many interests. Now, most of you will say this. Even in unguarded moments, I might say this, but it's technically wrong. And you can see it's wrong by taking out the first portion. There are two people who are doing the sharing, aren't there? There's the author and there's me. Well, let's take the author out and see how it works. Me shares many interests. Ouch, you can hear it's wrong. It should be I. I share many interests, whatever. The author and I share many interests. So you can correct many of these compound subject or compound object problems by taking the other member of the group out. So if you have a noun and a pronoun together doing something, Mary and walked home, you might feel like you should say Mary and me walked home because that's what you'll say in casual English. But take Mary out. You'd never say me walked home. You'd say I walked home. So add Mary back in and change the pronoun. Mary and I walked home. So you get the idea. Doer forms and receiver forms. And that's what section 36C on page 604 is all about. Use the correct pronoun in compound structures. And to test, simply take the other half of the structure out and leave the pronoun in and see if it feels right. If not, you're using the wrong form of the pronoun. It's not Angela and me were cleaning up the kitchen. Take Angela out. Has to be I. I was cleaning up the kitchen. Angela and I were cleaning up the kitchen. Now, 36D is a variation on this, subject complements. Now, we saw this earlier, but in the course, I mean, subject complement is simply something in the predicate of the sentence that refers back to the subject. I am great. Mary is queen. In each case, the great or the queen in those two sentences are subject complements. They're information that is actually being ascribed to the subject, I or Mary. Now, the verb to be, confusingly maybe, takes the subjective form on both sides, which is the reason it is supposedly correct to say it is I when someone asks who is it on the telephone. I know it sounds artificial. Most of us actually say it's me. But grammatically, you should be using I. It is I, it is you, it is he, because you use the subjective forms on both sides of the verb to be, on the doer side and on the predicate side. So this explains why the sentence at the bottom of page 604 is technically incorrect. Mark's best friends are Jane and me. Me is an objective form, and we don't use objective forms with the verb to be. It should be I. Mark's best friends are Jane and I. Do exercise 36.1 yourselves. Much the same thing goes on with appositives. Now, an appositive is just a noun phrase put next to another noun phrase to add more information about it. The two weary travelers, I'm 2/3 of the way down page 605. The two weary travelers, who are they? Ramon and somebody, found shelter in an old cabin. Now, you might feel, again, like you want to say me, but who's doing the sheltering? I found shelter in an old cabin, not me. Me found shelter in an old cabin sounds wrong. So take Ramon out, you get the same idea. The two weary travelers, Ramon and I, found shelter in an old cabin. Now, 36F, same idea, honestly. Use we or us before a noun depending on the noun's function. Take students out in the sentence at the bottom of 605 and you'll get the idea. We never get to decide such things. We students never get to decide such things. I know you want to say us students never get to decide such things, but technically incorrect. Because who's doing the deciding? We are. We students are. And they're doing the action. They're subjective. Okay, now 36G, we're expanding this a little because we're putting two sentences each side of comparatives like than or as. John is bigger than Mary is. This adventure is more exciting than yesterday's adventure was. Now, instead of using noun quantities, let's use pronouns and see what happens. 2/3 of the way down, page 607. Meg is quicker than. Now, I know you want to say him or her, depending on who's being compared. But think about it, it's actually two sentences. Mary is quick and she is quick. So when you put the two together with than, Meg is quicker than she is. Or Meg is quicker than she. I know this sounds a little artificial, maybe even a little stilted, but grammatically it's correct. The trick is to put the verb back in your mind anyway, and you'll see where the error is. Put the verb back in the Meg sentence and you'll understand. Meg is quicker than her is makes no sense. This is why you put she in after the than. Meg is quicker than she. Same in objective forms, which is the immediately preceding sentence. I started with the Meg one because it was subjective. In this case, we have we and they, but in the objective form. What's the objective form of we? It's us. What's the objective form of they? It's them. The tuition hikes affect them as much as us. You would never say we in the second case there, because it's the objective form, not the subjective. The tuition hikes are affecting two quantities, them and us. So we're not going to use they or we in those cases. Now, 36H is an interesting observation. When it's an infinitive form, to walk, to drink, to see, to defend, in this case, at the top of page 608, we always use the objective case. So even if the pronoun is the subjective form or the objective form, we always use the objective case. So it's correct in this case. We wanted our lawyer and her to defend us against this unfair charge. It would be wrong to say she, even though grammatically you might feel, well, she is to be doing the defending. She's the subject, therefore I should use a subjective form. But this is an exception, and it's only done with the infinitive. We wanted our lawyer and her, the objective form, followed by the infinitive, to defend, and again us, the objective form, against this unfair charge. Infinitives. Now, gerunds. A gerund is a special form of the ing form of verb. While the two words look exactly the same in the following two sentences, you can hear, you can see, you can understand they're being used differently. Sentence 1, John is drinking. Sentence 2, John likes drinking. Now, in this case, in the case of sentence 1, drinking is clearly the main verb. But in sentence 2, likes is the main verb, and drinking is now the object of the verb. In sentence 1, drinking is the present participle, the ing form. In sentence 2, it's still the ing form, it's still an ing form, but it's the verb being used as a noun, and that's called a gerund. And it isn't a present participle anymore. It's the verb, it's the action being described by the verb in a nominal form. So there are two gerunds being offered next to the carrots on halfway down page 608. Fighting and screeching. Because they're nouns, we always use the possessive case before them. That is to say, somebody has to own them. It's not somebody doing the action, it's somebody owning the action. So you won't hear the difference, but you can see the spelling difference in the first one here. The animals fighting disturbed the entire neighborhood. The S apostrophe indicates this is genitive plural, possessive plural, rather than just plain plural form. The second example is a little clearer. Because of their screeching, no one could get any sleep. It's not because of them screeching, it's because of their screeching, because that screeching is a gerund and that action is being possessed by the horrible animals that are fighting. Okay, now 36J, who and whom. This is a very frequent error. All you have to remember, really, well, before we do anything else, who and whom are, number one, used as relative pronouns. I met the man who shot my dog. And they're also used as interrogative pronouns. Who ate my pizza? And you can see they look exactly alike, but in the form of when they're used in questions, they're asking for more information. When they're being used in relatives, they have an antecedent, which is a quantity in the main clause, and they are the subject or object of a verb in that subclause. But who and who, regardless of whether it's a relative pronoun or an interrogative pronoun, who is always the doer of the action in the clause that it's in, and whom is always the receiver of the action in the clause that it's in. So you might think it might sound a bit grand to say whom wrote Hamlet, ? But that's absolutely wrong. Whom can only refer to somebody who is receiving the action. So you find an example in the following section there. The playwright whom audiences most admire is Shakespeare. That is to say, audiences admire whom. It's the object, isn't it? Now, if it isn't entirely clear, see, can you put the clause, can you make the clause a main clause in your head and ask yourself, is the who doing the action? And if it isn't, it should be whom. Henry Ford was the industrialist. I'm halfway down page 610. Henry Ford was the industrialist who introduced assembly line techniques to automobile manufacture. Now you can see, I hope, that the object of the subclause here is assembly line techniques. And the person who introduced the assembly line techniques is Henry Ford, who is the antecedent of the who in the relative clause. So the who has to be the doer of the action, so it's who, not whom. But look at the second example, 2/3 of the way down, 610. It is he whom we should credit with making automobiles widely affordable. Now you can see the main clause there. It is he, I guess. But then you have the relative clause. Somebody should take credit with making automobiles widely affordable. And who is that? Henry Ford. Sorry. We should give somebody credit. I bungled my first version of the subclause there. So the whom there is the object of the crediting. We should credit somebody with making automobiles widely affordable, and that somebody is Henry Ford. So the who in the subclause is the object, so we turn it to whom. It is he whom we should credit with making automobiles. Yeah, so there we are. Try exercise 36.5 and see how you do with who's and whom's. Pronouns always have antecedents, and that's what the second major section of this chapter is all about, pronoun antecedent agreement, at the bottom of page 611. And essentially, when you use a pronoun, you should be aware that it needs to have an antecedent somewhere in a preceding sentence, probably. If you're using a pronoun and you're not sure what the antecedent is, that's a strong sign that you're going to use it wrongly. Now, it can sometimes get a little confusing if there are more than one person, if there is more than one person involved. So, well, honestly, this isn't all that difficult. Take a look at the 3 careted sentences there on 612, and I really can't see anybody having errors with them. Jake and I discussed his problems with Margot. The his is clearly referring back to Jake, isn't it? Margot and I discussed our relationship over dinner. The our is clearly referring back to Margot and I. Now, a major problem with pronouns, particularly if you're approaching English from another language tradition, is that indefinite pronouns in English are usually singular. There's a list with a great deal of them, about a quarter of the way down, page 613. Anybody, anyone, anything, each, either, everybody, everyone, everything, etc. Yes, everybody is actually singular. And if you're coming to English from Spanish, for instance, you might be fooled into thinking everything or everybody equates to Spanish todos or similar. But as you know, todos in Spanish is plural, but everybody in English is singular. So remember that, practice, and be aware that many, not all, of the indefinite pronouns are singular. Take a look at the examples provided on page 613. Did either of the boys lose his bicycle? Now, I know you might be afraid that there's gender mix-up there. Should you use his? I know everyone's terrified of being sexist in their language there, but you have two boys, so it has to be masculine. Might as well be as specific as possible. Keep the his and keep the singular. Did either of the boys lose his bicycle? Both, on the other hand, is plural because it refers to two. Both boys lost their bicycles. What about everyone? Everyone lost bicycles. It's actually his or her, I guess, because it's singular. I know it's going to be awkward there. So you might want to restructure your sentence so it isn't inadvertently sexist, which is essentially what 36M is all about. But this has been drilled into you again and again in high school, so I don't think there's any need to spend too much time on section 36M. Read through that and be aware that you should be careful using pronouns like him and her if you feel that you might end up being inadvertently sexist. Now, 615, this isn't going to be a problem for Americans, but it may be a problem for people coming from other traditions. A team in the European English tradition is always plural. So Manchester lost their match against London. But in the United States, a team is always singular. Chicago lost its match against New York. Seeing as we're in America, let's stick to the American tradition. 36N, treat most collective nouns as singular. Family, jury, committee, crowd. Now, there can be exceptions, particularly if the group is being considered as a group of individuals. So take a look at the second carroted example on page 616. The committee left the conference room and returned to offices. Now, in the conference room, the committee is behaving as a single entity, fair enough, but it's a number of individuals who have separate offices. So you're going to have to treat, at least in the second half of that sentence, the committee as a plural group. The committee left the conference room and returned to their offices. All right. 36O, I think, is common sense. Sometimes you might allow yourself to see a plurality in a sentence like being a teacher and a mother, but they're referring back to the same person, aren't they? I'm 3/4 of the way down page 616. Being a teacher and a mother keeps her busy. No, them, obviously, because it's the same person. Now, there are 3 reasons pronoun reference can fail. I'm at the bottom of page 617 here. Number 1, if it's ambiguous. And let's see. There's a nice example with Odysseus somewhere, but I can't find it anymore. Oh well. Let's take a look at the vague example, just under 36Q on page 618. The friendly banter between Hamlet and Horatio eventually provokes him to declare that his worldview has changed. Who's the him referring to? It could be either Hamlet or Horatio. So remove the him, it's too darn vague, and replace it by the person you're referring to. The friendly banter between Hamlet and Horatio eventually provokes Hamlet to declare that his worldview has changed. Implied reference. This is a common error with students. Let's take a look at the first caroted sentence on page 619. Every weekday afternoon, my brothers cycle home from school and then they leave them in the driveway. Now, it's pretty clear that the brothers came on bicycles because they cycled home from school, but there's no specific reference to bicycles. So this isn't just vague, it's weird. That them has to have an antecedent and it's not there as it stands. I would drop the pronoun entirely and refer to the bicycles, just as the text does. Every weekday afternoon, my brothers cycle home from school and then they leave their bikes in the driveway. Solved. And the third problem, it's a common enough problem too with student papers, particularly if you're writing in a hurry and you write a long sentence and there's a pronoun in there and the antecedent ends up being too far away from the pronoun itself. Let's see, is there a better example here? Yeah, this is the caroted sentence or section at the the end of page 620. Berlioz's unconventional music irritated the opera and concert establishment. To get a hearing for his works, Berlioz had to arrange concerts at his own expense. Although he had a following of about 1,200 who faithfully bought tickets to his concerts, he needed supplementary income from journalism to finance the performances. Now, it's relatively clear who's being referred to, but by the end of this paragraph, the reader is unconsciously beginning to fear that he might be referring to someone else at this stage. So it's no harm to jog their memory by putting in the antecedent again. And that's exactly what the text does at the top of page 621. It reminds us that Berlioz is the person being referred to there. So that's chapter 36, and I would strongly recommend that you give both exercises 36.7 and 36.8 a spin to see if you can figure out your the correct pronoun usage there. And feel free to put questions up on the discussion forum if you feel there's anything still vague or needing discussion, and we'll talk about it in our live meeting on Thursday. So I hope all is well, and thank you for your attention.